Hello, everyone, and good morning. Welcome to our live feed update for September 7th. I'm your host, Taran Armstrong, and with me today is Liana. How you doing, Liana?
I'm good. I'm happy to be back. I was at the Yale Genetics Department retreat the past 2 days and had to essentially go on a complete social media freeze. I did not get to watch the DE live. I'm still excited about it. I know it's still been a couple days after, but please bear with me while I am still excited about the outcome of the double eviction.
Oh my. That's
Yeah, it was rough. It was really rough. It was like 11 p.m. We finally finished at like 11 p.m. on Thursday. I was like, oh no, what do I do? Like, I have to go to bed because I have to be up early for talks. Oh no, it was a complete disaster. So I came home Friday at like 6 p.m. Was like, all right, let's watch the double eviction, and watched it by myself, just like in my own thoughts. It was really lovely, so fun. I wish I could have watched it live, but here I am, ready to talk about everything, up to date now.
you're like somebody that's gone back and rewatched like Big Brother 3, and you're, guys, Marcellus didn't use the veto.
Can you believe that?
What is happening?
Yes, exactly. It's like, I don't know. I finally got into a TV show that everybody has already watched, but I still want to talk about it. Like, that's how I feel.
Yes. So we are here to update you on everything that happened yesterday. Not a few days ago, but yesterday on the Big Brother 21 live feeds. It was day 80 in the house. 80 days in. Oh boy.
It's crazy.
Yeah. We finally got our HOH winner. They played the movie poster HOH, which was the same as last year for this Final Five HOH, and it was Jackson who's going to take it home.
That's crazy. Holly and Jackson have been up in that HOH room for what, like pretty much a month? Like, that's insane because, obviously Nicole won the double eviction HOH. I don't know if anybody knows. But yet, she obviously is only HOH for in an hour, right? And so it's been Jackson and Holly up in that room for a very, very long time.
Yeah, they went Jackson, Holly, Jackson, Nicole, Jackson.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. Talk about winning out competitions.
Yeah. So that's what we've got here. Apparently, he just pretty much just dominated the competition. That's what Swaggy said on Twitter, that he bodied everybody else, which I assume just means that he dominated.
Yeah, that's how I interpreted that as well. I don't know. I need a Swaggy C translator, but he did win. So based on context clues, I think we can assume that he crushed everybody.
Yes, he was talking about the competition. Holly was saying that she got no points, that she felt like she knew all the answers, but she never buzzed in on time. Whereas Jackson was like, yeah, I was just buzzing immediately. And then I was like, kind of narrowed it down to 2 and then just kind of went with my gut. I think perhaps, again, this is the kind of competition where Jackson's just in competition strategy paid off, where just it was all about buzzing in first, and he was really good at that.
Yeah. Strategic mastermind Jackson, as we all know. I don't know. I think it has to do with maybe like smashing watermelons. He's very Gallagher-esque, smashing buttons, just go for it type of strategy. I'm not sure.
Yes. So there you go. Jackson is going to be the HOH for the week. Now, he is not going to occupy the HOH room, however. He is going to allow Nicole to have a week in the HOH room because him and Holly have been up there for 3 weeks now. And so Nicole won the double eviction HOH, so he's going to let Nicole have the room for a week.
Yeah, so we'll see. I mean, they pretty much had to beg her to take it, to have Nicole take it. So that was pretty funny. But then it was really hilarious because then later on that night when Nicole is like graciously accepts that she's going to take the HOH room and then goes up there is like, yeah, so like have my stuff, and Holly and Jackson are still up there and won't leave. I think eventually she did get it, but that was, they were just so used to being up there, it was hard to get them out.
There are a lot of watermelons up there, so it's
to wade through all the watermelons to get to the Pegasus slippers is really difficult.
So, so that's what we've got here. Jackson as the HOH. Now, of course, this means a lot of things. That obviously he will not be putting Holly on the block if he has the option, which for initial nominations, of course, he does. However, as we get to the veto competition, BB Comics, if Tommy wins this veto, because Tommy is the target, nothing has changed. If Tommy wins this veto, then it will force Cliff and Nicole on the block. One of them will leave, and the question becomes, which one? If Tommy does not win the veto, it does appear that Tommy will be going home this week. And there is still a very small chance that the person left off the block, if they win the veto, they could theoretically use it to force Jackson to put Holly on the block, and then theoretically could vote Holly out. But I do not believe that is a plan for anybody, that that they would prefer to take Tommy out if he doesn't win. So this is a do or die moment for Tommy, and if he wins this veto, then one of Cliff or Nicole will be going home.
Yeah, so I mean, let's just jump ahead to actual nominations. I don't know why I would bury the lead with the actual situation.
Well, because we've got there's some talk. There's some talk first. That Jackson and Cliff had a conversation prior to the nominations where Jackson basically let Cliff know, like, they were talking about how much they respect each other and how much they would like love for the other one to win if they don't, which is something that Cliff has told a lot of people in the house. And Jackson essentially said to Cliff, like, no matter what happens this week, I hope you know that you're the person I want to have stay in that. I don't want you going anywhere. And Cliff was essentially like, say no more. I don't need to hear, I don't want to know that you're going to send Nicole out, essentially. I don't want to have to be burdened with that knowledge. And so Cliff lets Jackson know that the initial nominees really don't matter at all, because it's just about whether or not Tommy wins that veto, and so on and so forth. So it appears, based on this conversation, that Jackson is actually leaning toward keeping Cliff over Nicole in the event that Tommy wins the veto. Now, obviously, this could just be Jackson blowing smoke, or perhaps he didn't even necessarily mean it in that way when he was telling Cliff this. But I do lean toward the idea that he was leaning toward this idea, because he's not really the kind of player to promise something if he doesn't plan on going through with that promise. Not that it was an actual promise, of course, but no reason to tell Cliff this unless it was something that he was already thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely believe Jackson in this moment. There is a lot of sort of, how much, like you said, I have so much respect for you in this game, blah, 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 blah. I want you both to win. But it does feel genuine coming from Jackson. It was also kind of funny. It really came full circle, because I think it was, I don't know, maybe like 6 weeks ago, whatever, when Cliff was just trying to find a place to land after Cliff Notes got brought up. And it was so funny. He said in this conversation, like, Cliff just needed a place to land, and he found that with Jackson. And that was like, it was real sweet. So I believe in this instance that, yes, Jackson would want to keep Cliff and send Nicole out the door if it were to come to that.
Yes. So Jackson also talked to Tommy. They cleared the air a little bit. Like, yeah, I was targeting you. You were targeting me, right? Like, Jackson's like, I was targeting Christy more than you, it was always Christy's fault. And they talk about Christy a bit. Tommy does try to throw a little bit of doubt into Jackson's mind about Cliff and Nicole, like, hey, they were playing the middle. I mean, you never know, maybe we weren't coming after you, maybe that was being planted in your head. But Jackson's like, come on, we were all doing the same thing.
Yeah, there was a lot of like, well, I don't know, there may have been another person that really did it. I was just sort of there. I like went along with it. It was a very odd conversation. It was like a little heated, a lot of I need to speak my truth type of phrases. It was actually a kind of interesting conversation, because it was like both trying to speak precisely about situations, but yeah, being very vague. And yeah, I mean, essentially Tommy even knows in this conversation, he's like, yeah, I know I have to win veto. So like, he's resigned to his situation, at least at this moment, even though he's seemingly trying to do a little bit of work. I think he knows that it's pretty much a lost cause.
Yeah, and obviously Tommy has a I wouldn't say it's the best argument in the world, but I think he has an argument to stay that he hasn't used yet, which is essentially, that's 2, I'm 1. Let me make a deal with you that at the final 4, I will not take you out. I will take out the other 1. It will be me versus that other 1. It will be 3 versus 1 instead of 2 versus 2 at the final 4 if you keep me. That's what Tommy should pitch eventually, and I think he's doing, if he plans on doing it, that's he should pitch that a little bit later. Wait till he wins the veto first, but I would expect that pitch to come in at some point. I don't think it will be successful, but you never know.
I mean, that's really, I think, the only option he has. I mean, I think you can say, look, this is a pair. You will always take Holly, Holly will always take you, Cliff and Nicole will always take each other. Whereas with me, at least like he can try to like, even if Jackson didn't trust him, at least it's a little bit more of a guarantee that Tommy would take or not take out Jackson and or Holly. So, I mean, I think that's really all he has at this point, because we're getting down, it's the final 5 now. It's really coming down to competition. So, we'll see if Tommy can make something happen.
Yes. So Cliff and Tommy are nominated for eviction. A lot of people were thinking that it would be Nicole on the block based on Jackson's conversation with Cliff, but it seems as though that conversation was a little bit more kind of like, Cliff, you're going on the block, so don't worry about it, than it was, I'm definitely choosing you over Nicole. Though it does seem still like that, again, like he was inferring that he would take out Nicole over Cliff, but the way that Jackson likes to talk, he, if this was like a done deal, this would have been more clear, I think. So I don't think it's necessarily a done deal, though it certainly puts Nicole in more danger than I expected her to be in this week. I do think that there's still a lot of fluidity here, which we'll definitely get to as we discuss this conversation between Jackson and Holly a little bit after the nominations. But I do want to say that I think it's the right move for Jackson to keep Cliff over Nicole, personally. I think that there are a couple of reasons why. Cliff is a lot less likely to be taken to the end by Tommy. Like, say Tommy wins the veto, so he has to choose between Cliff and Nicole. If he sends Nicole out at the final 4, obviously Tommy is still probably gunning for him or along those lines, but there's more of a chance that that Tommy would not want to work with Cliff, and there's more of a chance that Cliff wouldn't want to work with Tommy. I think that there's a chance that Cliff might decide he has a better shot at beating in the final 3 against Jackson than against Tommy, theoretically. Not super likely, but the more pressing point here is that if they do get to the final 3, that Cliff is a lot easier to beat in the final 3 than Nicole, in my opinion. Those first 2 competitions in part 1 and part 2, very physical. First one is endurance. Second one is like often climbing a wall and like doing things, and I feel like Nicole is more capable of winning that endurance part, and also certainly capable of winning that second part, and then they definitely have to worry about Nicole beating them in part 3, and then if Nicole wins, she's definitely taking Holly, which is not good for Jackson. So if Jackson gets there to the final 3 with Holly, I feel like they both fairly easily, but Cliff might have a chance beat him, and then they'd both be in part 3, and then Jackson's the winner.
Yeah, I think at this point in the game, there's sort of 3 factors that you have to keep in mind when you're looking at the end game. One is, who can you beat in competitions? Because winning these end game competitions is so critically important. Who can you then actually beat sitting next to in the final 2, and who would potentially take you if you didn't win the competitions? And it's interesting because I know that Cliff is a bigger jury threat, and I have to imagine that Jackson sees that, but that almost at this point in time is the 3rd priority. You have to think about who you can beat in competitions and who might take you to the end, because you have to get there first. And there are still opportunities to take out Cliff. So I can see why they would want to keep Cliff in this situation, even though he is potentially a bigger jury threat. Obviously, we're operating with information that they don't know. We've seen the jury segments and stuff, but you have to imagine Cliff is probably well liked and would be a jury threat. So that's, I would assume that Jackson, well, I don't know, maybe that's a big assumption that he can read the situation properly. So yeah, so that's why I can understand the logic of wanting to take out Nicole and keep Cliff, even though it may not seem like the most strategically sound decision immediately when you look at the situation.
Yeah, and not for nothing, if I'm Jackson, I'm also, and not to say that he's thinking this, but I'm also a little bit worried about Holly pulling a Drew from Big Brother 5. And if she's choosing between me and Nicole, that's a pretty clear choice if you want to win the game. Right. And so it's a much more difficult choice if she's choosing between me and Cliff, because she feels like she's going to lose against Cliff. So if she's going to lose to somebody, it might as well be me. And she probably has a better shot against me than Cliff. Whereas Nicole, she might have a better shot against Nicole. And so that's another reason why if I'm Jackson, I especially want Cliff there instead of Nicole. But Holly, kind of another story, because from Holly's perspective, she's rapidly... So Holly, right now, I've tweeted this out. Holly is in the Big Brother 18 Nicole spot, where for those RHAP fans who were listening to the podcast back in Big Brother 18, I was a big proponent of Nicole's game at the time, and when the Final 5 hit, I said, boom, Nicole is a lock for Final 3, guys, because what's his name? I almost called him Clay. The guy, whatever, her boyfriend at the time, Corey.
Yeah, the guy who lit the goat on fire. Who was also on TMZ for working out. Right? That was that guy?
Corey won the Final 5 HOH, and Corey was the bigger target over Nicole. And so because Corey won the Final 5 HOH, that means Corey cannot compete in the Final 4 HOH. So the same is true of Jackson. Jackson can't compete in the Final 4 HOH, which means that Corey/Jackson cannot be immune at the Final 4. So when they compete in the Final 4 veto, either Holly or Jackson will win the veto, and they'll both be safe, and they'll send home one of the other two, or one of the other two will win the veto, and there's nothing that Jackson can do to save himself. He will always be available to be evicted, and he will always be evicted before Holly, or at least it appears that way. So Holly should be basically a lock for Final 3. Now, I was much more a proponent of Nicole's game than I am of Holly's at this point. I felt that Nicole had a much better chance of winning a jury vote than Holly does, and that's because Holly is rapidly running out of people that she can beat in the end. I think she can't beat Jackson. I think she can't beat Tommy. I think she can't beat Cliff, or at least she has a lot of trouble beating all three of those people, according to our current analysis of the jury. And so the only person she might have a shot against is Nicole. And so there's a little bit of a conflict of interest between Holly and Jackson if they're both thinking, about best case scenario in terms of who to evict. But I don't think either of them are really thinking about that quite yet, because Tommy hasn't won the veto yet.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's going to be really, really interesting when if Tommy wins the veto and they're actually forced to potentially have these conversations. I was going to say they would have these conversations, but I don't know if they actually would. But that would be by far the most interesting, because otherwise I think it's pretty much a done deal that Tommy would be going home if he doesn't win the veto.
Yeah, and also, like, as far as I'm aware, Holly has no plans of betraying Jackson to take Nicole anyway, so That's not really that much of a factor.
Yeah, right. I don't think that she's quite thought through who she can beat, because otherwise, yeah, she would be a little bit more self-interested. But right now, it's all about her and Jackson. They just got to get to the Final 4.
Yeah, and it's a particularly tricky situation for Cliff as well, because if Tommy wins this veto, even if Cliff does survive the vote, which would be pretty impressive, sitting next to Nicole, losing Nicole is a massive, massive blow to his game, because he kind of needs her in the final three. Again, he's going to have a lot of trouble unless they change up those final three first part 1 and part 2 competitions. It's really hard to see Cliff beating any of Tommy, Holly, or Jackson in part 1 or part 2, which means he's not going to be there in part 3, which means he can't win the final 3 HOH, which means he will need to be taken by either Holly, Jackson, or Tommy, and I don't think any of those 3 take him unless it's Tommy and Jackson in the final 3. So at that point, Cliff's best, if Cliff loses Nicole, I think his only hope from there is to win the final 4 veto and evict Holly, of all people. Maybe she wouldn't be a lock for final day, though I'm not sure he's thinking in these terms. And then it would be Tommy and Jackson, and then he'd have to hope that they take him. They probably would, but then he also has to hope that he can beat them, which might be a tough order as well. So it's a really, really rough road for Cliff if he loses Nicole here. Whereas Nicole can lose Cliff, and I think still be pretty much fine. If anything, that improves her game because she plans on taking him to the final 2, and he's probably one of the people she has the most trouble beating.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think Nicole then would, if Cliff was gone, would think about taking Holly, which is her, I think, her best bet. I think for Cliff, you have to really hope that part 2 of the final HOH, because it's always involves some sort of like ordering the, the house guests and how they went out in the season. If it's something like that, but not the physical component, because, we've seen the climbing up the rock wall, we've seen like running around, punching, knocking down the cardboard cutouts and stuff. But I saw him hobbling around, in these past episodes. Like if it involves running, like poor Cliff is not going to be able to do it. So ideally for him, it would be the mental component without the physical aspect. But I think that that's the best that he could hope for.
Yeah. Or, honestly, he could also hope for just it being a very difficult mental aspect. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Jackson, he certainly won a mental HOH right here with the movie posters one, but I do think he will have trouble with difficult questions that involve days. He doesn't study that much, and he doesn't know these things like Cliff and Nicole do. And so if these are difficult questions that involve a lot of like reordering and things that Jackson just doesn't know, then that may give Cliff the ability to win, even if he is considerably slower on whatever physical part there is. But I don't think that typically part 2 is that difficult. I think that what we saw in part 3 last season, which has become, instead of a crapshoot, actually mental, like just strictly mental, those were some pretty difficult questions, and that's why I feel like Nicole or Cliff could have a really great shot to beat Jackson or Holly in part 3. But part 2, I feel like the questions are still simple enough that somebody like Jackson, who is just clearly good overall, can make up for any lack of studying with his physicality.
Yeah, I mean, it's typically not the days comp. We see that before. We see that as like a final 4 veto. And so I don't think that that's something that they would hold on to until part 2 of the HOH. And, yes, Cliff and Nicole probably stand a better chance in part 3. But if you're going to play in part 3, you actually have to get there. And that involves winning either part 1 or part 2. So we'll have to see how this all shakes out.
Yes. So Jackson and Holly talk a bit. They talk about next week in the veto. They for like a good 10 minutes almost, were like, man, so what'll happen is it'll be 2 versus 2 in the veto, and if we lose, then they're gonna, Cliff will probably evict you, Jackson, or maybe me, who knows. Maybe it's best for us to just throw the HOH, and then I can't even follow the logic of why they thought that worked. Like, well, maybe it's better to even just not even win the HOH and just compete in the veto.
Yeah, like if they won HOH, they would then be ineligible from playing in the veto. It was like very odd that like, oh, maybe if you use up all your competition luck in winning the HOH, then you can't use it to win veto or something. It was very, very odd because there sort of wasn't a through line. It was almost like, like, I don't know, they were trying to do like a kid's puzzle, but they were definitely missing pieces. It was just a disaster.
Yeah. And this is one of the reasons why I feel like in these sort of days mental competitions, I feel like Cliff and Nicole have a leg up, right? Like they don't always 100%, know what's going on with this kind of thing. And so they talk about that. They eventually kind of come to the maybe maybe it doesn't matter. I'm not sure. But they were a little bit lost here. They talk about how they do think that Cliff would take out Jackson if he could. That Jackson is the only person that could maybe beat Cliff in the final two. And Holly tries to insinuate even further that she thinks that Cliff might even be able to beat Jackson in the final two. And Holly says, you know what, though? Pointless to think about this right now, because if Tommy wins the veto, Cliff won't even be here in the final four. So Holly is not even proposing that they take out Cliff if Tommy wins the veto. She is assuming that Cliff is leaving if Tommy wins the veto. And Jackson does not correct that assumption. He's just okay. But Holly does say, well, what would happen is that Tommy would just take Cliff's place, that he would team up with Nicole and it would still be 2v2. So that was an interesting thing as well. Again, I feel like it's not set in stone yet who they would decide to evict. Holly definitely seems to be under the assumption that the best move is to evict Cliff. Jackson has already kind of insinuated to Cliff that he would keep Cliff, but I think he was vague enough that he can definitely change his mind or whatever. So I don't think we have an answer here yet.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to exactly know what's going on in the square head of Jackson's. But I think that he doesn't feel super strongly one way or the other. Like, I do feel in that conversation with Cliff, he was being genuine. So then when he had that conversation with Holly, my thought was, well, maybe he just doesn't want to talk to her because that's how he operates. And so he's just like, oh, it wasn't worth discussing because, they weren't going to be in that predicament yet. So if the veto is won, then we could have more direct, serious conversations coming from Jackson. But, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, my guess right now is that Cliff did a good job in the conversation of getting Jackson to feel very emotional and comfortable with with him, so that Jackson was like, yeah, you know what? I want you here no matter what, Cliff. And then afterward, when he was talking with Holly about Cliff being a bigger threat, and Holly was assuming that Cliff would go, he was kind of like, oh, should I have promised that in that moment? Oh, man, now I'm not sure. And so he didn't say anything. And a lot of people are like, oh, well, Jackson doesn't vote. Why does it matter? Well, if Jackson's going to discuss it with Holly and they're going to decide together. That's what's going to happen. So we'll see. We'll see. Tommy talks to the cameras. He's still upset about being blindsided. This was an interesting conversation because I've actually been pretty impressed by how Tommy has handled the whole thing. Typically when something bad happens to somebody, especially if they've been riding high for a long time, there's a lot of bitterness and sort of, oh, these are bad people. I can't believe they did this. I never would have done this to. But instead, he's been he's been upset. He's been sad, but he's been very respectful and very very good to the other people in the house. But when he's alone, he's like, man, I'm bitter. I don't know if I'm bitter, if I'm just being bitter, or if because I think it was the wrong move. But this sucks. I just wish that hadn't happened. I've got to win this veto, or I'm out of here. So I'm gonna be fighting for this, like I haven't fought for anything else in this house before. So watch out for me, says Tommy.
Yeah, this was kind of funny because I feel like it was, we don't hear him being bitter in the house with other people because he has no one to be bitter with or to, right? So he's completely by himself. So then the bitterness has to come out in the one-on-one conversations with, the camera only conversations because we can't see it anywhere else.
So Cliff talks to the cameras. He says this was actually pretty funny because there's especially after Jackson won, a lot of people are like, oh, see, it was a mistake not to take the shot at Jackson. So Cliff is talking to the cameras. He's like, some people might be thinking what were you guys thinking not taking a shot at Jackson? And he was like, well, look, first of all, I think Tommy and Christy are also great competitors. Christy nearly beat me in that veto. They are just as capable of winning competitions, I think. And we had a deal with Jackson and Holly, and staying true to that deal means that we're still good with them right now. And if they weren't good with them right now, they would probably be going home. He sort of explains pretty much all of the reasoning that I would have expected him to have. And I will say that I do think it is a minority that thinks that Nicole should have taken the shot at Jackson. I put up a poll.
Not on Facebook. So we're doing the RHAP B&B. Actually, we're recording later today, and we're doing a Casuals Corner segment, and I cannot even tell you how many comments were like, oh my gosh, I can't believe Nicole didn't take a shot at Jackson. Just give Jackson the money. Like, Nicole is so stupid, blah, blah, blah.
I thought they hated Christy.
They've moved on, apparently. I don't know. So yeah, so there were a lot of people on the Facebook page that really think that Holly should have gone after Jackson. So I actually thought that it was so hilarious seeing Cliff talk about this, because I was like, play this for the casuals, like put this up on the Facebook page. There is logic behind this decision. They just don't see it. So yeah, there is a group of people that think that she made a mistake.
I put up a poll on Twitter that's like which pair should she have targeted, and it was interesting because it was about 75% was saying Christy and Tommy were the right move, and then about 15% was Jackson and Holly she should have gone after. But then I put up that poll before Jackson won the HOH. After Jackson won the HOH, it did shift a little bit. The Christy Tommy side went down to 70%, and Jackson Holly gained another 5%, moved up to 20% that people thought that she should have targeted them, which I thought was very interesting because the reason I felt it was the right move to target Christy and Tommy was because Jackson could win this HOH and then take out Tommy, and now they're in a better position moving forward into the Final Four veto. But I think people are just, now that Jackson did win this HOH, especially because it was mental, people are getting a little more scared that maybe he is unbeatable.
Yeah, I mean, because I think if you're just looking at it from a who's going to target who and keeping yourself out of danger, absolutely targeting Christy and Tommy was the right move, because now if you take out Jackson, who's gonna bother taking out Holly? Cliff and Nicole do become the next pair to be targeted. But again, on the flip side, you're weighing all of these different variables. And so if you're thinking about who you are going to have to beat in competitions, Jackson is a comp beast. And I know it's being a little bit results oriented because he did win this HOH, but you have to keep in mind, if people are going to be winning and go on a run on these comps, that's a big threat too.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective here, it's the decision comes down to, do you want to have to win 3 weeks of competitions in a row or 2 weeks of competitions in a row? Because if you take the shot at Jackson and Holly, then you are the next target for everyone in the house for the next 3 weeks, and you and Nicole have to win the next 3 weeks of competitions in order to survive. Whereas if you go with Tommy and Christy as the targets, then you're in a much better spot, because if Tommy had won this HOH, you're wonderful. Everything is perfect, and now you don't even need to win the next 3 weeks. You don't even need to win necessarily the next 2 weeks. You're super solid. But if worst case Jackson wins this, he's still loyal to you because you have a deal, and you still didn't have to win this. You just have to make sure that Tommy doesn't win, which should be fine if Jackson is so unbeatable. And so then you just have to win 2 competitions: Final Four veto, Final 3 HOH, and that's all you need to do. And I would still, I don't care how good someone is at competitions, Jackson is not that much better than Tommy. He really isn't. That's just not how the competitions work in Big Brother. And so I would definitely take my chances not having to win as many competitions, being in a better spot both with the jury and strategically in the house. And again, best case scenario, it doesn't even come to this in the first place, but even if it does, I think things are still looking much better than they would be otherwise. And that's what Nicole is talking about when she talks to the cameras as well, that She thinks she made the right call, because if she had taken the shot at Jackson and Holly and Tommy had won this HOH, Tommy would not be going after the remainder of Jackson and Holly. He would be teaming up with Holly, and it would be her and Cliff on the block right now.
Yeah, exactly. Teaming up with the remainder that remains and going after Nicole and Cliff. So yeah, I mean, as soon as you start to run through all of the different scenarios, it reaffirms that yes, this was the correct decision. Also, in terms of beating Jackson in future competitions, we know his kryptonite. Smash a watermelon right before a competition. He'll be emotionally distressed. He won't be able to go into the DR to get new watermelons. And then he's totally off his game and you can beat him. So there you go. Case solved.
Jackson's lost plenty of competitions throughout the season. Like, it's not, nobody is unbeatable in Big Brother. It's less true in Big Brother Canada, but even in Big Brother Canada, we thought Adam was a comp beast, and then it turned out no, it was Dane that was the comp beast, right? Like, things happen like that all the time. Nobody is, it's very rare that somebody is just completely unevictable for like an extreme period of time, and this is the only chance to ever get them out. I would definitely take the odds of not having to win as much. I think it's harder to win 3 competitions against slightly worse competition than 2 competitions against slightly better competition. Personally.
Just like statistically, it's harder to do. So it makes sense.
All right. So also we had Jackson and Nicole. He did tell Nicole that he doesn't want to think about what will need to happen if Tommy wins the veto. He's not promising anything. He doesn't want to think about the fact that he'd probably have to break some kind of tie or something along those lines. He's still being very vague to Nicole, as opposed to not as vague with Cliff. But again, I don't know. This is still up in the air for me.
Yeah, and I think it's still probably up in the air for Jackson. Like, I don't think that he knows what he would do until he's put in that situation. And I think that that's probably the reason why we're not getting anything concrete from him, is that, he doesn't want to think about it.
Yeah, so that's about what we had. Anything else that you wanted to bring up, Liana?
Oh man, I don't think so. Big Brother historian Jackson, as obviously he knows everything. Apparently there's always been BB Comics since it started. There has always been BB Comics. So that was news to me. And just the forcefulness with which Jackson says this statement was really funny. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Well, there you go. There was people love to fly their drones over the Big Brother backyard. There is an image of what looks like BB Comics. There's some speculation, and it does kind of look like this might be more along the lines of BB Comics Classic than the newer BB Comics from last year. Last year it was an obstacle course where they had to like run around. There was a balance beam, and they had to like knock down the things. I think that it really actually matters whether it's an obstacle course or like the hang glide, whatever, zip line thing, because I think Cliff is going to have a lot of trouble on a balance beam.
He has trouble walking down the hall to vote.
Yeah.
Okay, like poor Cliff is going to struggle on anything else.
Like, that's a real choke point for Cliff. And I also feel like Nicole might have some trouble with any physical parts that might slow her down a bit, even if she has all the right answers. I think that a physical obstacle course type BB Comics does limit Nicole and Cliff's ability to win this, which gives Tommy a much better chance to win, which would be very bad for Nicole and Cliff. However, if it's BB Comics Classic, then I think they're still obviously maybe moving a bit slower than Jackson or Tommy would be, but it's a significantly lesser disadvantage to just have to like climb up a thing and do the zip line and they see all the stuff again.
Yeah, I mean, this is pretty much exactly what we were talking about with the part 2 of the final HOH,
Yes.
right? It's essentially you have a mental component, but the physical part really matters because that could make a difference or be more of a hindrance to certain players, based on their strengths. And so what we see is the physical component of this. I agree with you. I think will actually make a pretty big difference. So I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, and
Fingers
so
crossed.
it kind of, it's very hard to tell because it's a, if you're gonna fly your drone over the house, let's get some better shots, guys.
Like, if we're gonna do this.
But one thing that you can see is there's a wall that looks like where the comics would be, and there's a big window looking thing higher up, sort of looking over the wall, which seems like the kind of thing that you'd look through the window to see the things and then do the thing, right? So
I think so. I mean, that's what it looks like, but I don't know. It's hard to tell.
it's very hard to tell. So
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll see.
all right, so that's what we have for you. Tune in tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. Eastern, where I will update you on everything that happens today on the Big Brother 21 live feeds. We will likely know what is the outcome of the veto. If Tommy wins it, that's big. If he doesn't, I don't think he's 100% dead. Like I said, I do think he has a strong case to make. It's not a case that I would hear out if I were Jackson and Holly, but I am not Jackson and Holly. They are Jackson and Holly, and they might consider it because it is, if he sticks to the strongest points, 2v2 or 3v2 next week. What do you think? I've never lied to you. It was always Christy. I've always been on your side. I feel like there's a case to be made. I don't think they'll hear it out, but there is a case, so we'll see. And then if Tommy does win, then it'll be Nicole or Cliff going home, and that'll be kind of interesting as well. I think I do think they'll both start to campaign against each other and in a respectful way, and they said as much. But they had a pretty sweet interaction. They were talking about how they've made it so far together and never really turned on each other. And I did tweet this out that in a season full of pre-existing relationships, dominating majorities, it was the Fellowship of the Zing that has now become the longest lasting alliance of Big Brother 21. And yes, that includes all of the alliances. Grateful broke up like 3 weeks in. Six Shooters broke up long ago. They are not in it. Jolly's not an alliance, it's a showmance. And also, they weren't even a final two until like halfway through the season when Kat went home, because Kat was Holly's final two for a long time. So it's all about the Fellowship of the Zing.
Yeah, that's kind of cute to think that the alliance we were, there's no, like, what even is this? It's includes someone who's not even in the game. Like, yes, he's in the house, he's not in the game. But yeah, we have two members sitting here in the final five. It's pretty crazy.
And I just love how condescending everyone was about Zing, the alliance that includes an evicted person. And now who's laughing?
Yeah, it didn't really go so well for Ovi, but the other two members really did benefit from this situation.
All right, so that's what we have for you. Make sure you find me on Twitch, twitch.tv/Taran Armstrong. Maybe we'll do something tonight on Twitch, but it would probably be pretty late. You can also find me on YouTube, Taran Armstrong. I posted the funeral analysis there, and I saw this morning that Dan actually watched it and gave the thumbs up. Said that I remembered it better than he did.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so that's cool. Check that out. You can also find me on Twitter at ArmstrongTaran. Liana, where can people find you?
You can find me on social media at Liana Boris. Like I mentioned during the show, the RHAP B&B will be back. So Mike Bloom and I are going to be recording later today with Puya from Puya Fridays, talking about everything Big Brother. We have a lot of really, really fun, stupid stuff. So definitely check it out. We're going to be going through a little bit of an oral history of Zingbot, discussing the ups and downs of Zingbot's life, which I think is going to be fun. Games, all that fun stuff. So definitely look for that.
All right. I feel like that casual corner is a very valuable piece of content.
So it was hilarious. So I'm putting together the quiz and I was like, this is actually more enlightening for strategy at the moment than like finding funny comments. So,
well, yeah, and also like we were like, oh, is Nicole now in the lead for America's favorite player after she took down America's monster Christy?
Nope.
But maybe not. Maybe Cliff still has the lead. Who knows?
It does seem to still be Cliff.
Wow.
So there's time for things to change. But yeah, apparently it doesn't matter, even though the casuals hated Christy. The person who took her out, I guess, doesn't get any of the credit and instead gets maligned for not going after Jackson. Okay.
There you go. So maybe throwing that HOH was the best thing for Cliff in terms of America's favorite player. So there you go. All right. Thank you so much once again for joining us. I will see you next time.